Bob, you're our expert here. Explain the how the Emergencies Act, in your mind, was meant to be interpreted by the Office of the Presidency.
Meant to be interpreted by the Office of the Presidency. Well, it may be that Donald Trump tonight suggested his lawyers have interpreted it expansively. That is not Congress's intention. Congress enacted this statute to give the president the authority to declare national emergencies where one exists. There is nothing in the legislative history or in the text of the statute that suggests that his discretion extends so far as to declare, as he sees fit, any set of conditions, including political conditions, to be a national emergency. There has to be a national emergency that he then declares in order to access these legal authorities.
Who judges? Who's the, isn't that subjective in and of itself, the issue? One person's emergency is another person's, well, it's a pain, but it's not an emergency. I mean, I don't mean to be that, but it does seem somewhat subjective, no?
Well, you put your finger on an important point. Normally, a president would expect a significant amount of deference. And then, of course, Congress has the authority to step in and terminate emergencies that the president has declared. However, Donald Trump has done everything that a president could possibly do to undermine his position that he's declaring a true national emergency within the meaning of this statute. He has said, for example, that the wall is mostly built, that it's been extraordinarily successful by huge percentages. Many of the problems that he believes have been created at the southern border have been contained.
Right.
At the same time, in describing the threat, he has made statements, say, about human trafficking or the flow of drugs or the influx of terrorists that are completely contrary to fact and in some instances have been refuted by his own State Department. And so in those circumstances, I think that this president would have enormous difficulty sustaining the view that he was, within the meaning of this statute, declaring a true national emergency. And if he can't do that, then he can't access the authorities that he wants to use to free up the money for the building of his wall.
Hello, YouTubers. If you're watching this, it means you've checked out our channel, so thank you. Now do me a favor, subscribe by clicking on that button down there. Click on any of the videos to watch the latest interviews and highlights from MTP Daily and MSNBC. You can get more Beat the Press content every morning in the First Read newsletter. If you're tired of content that you don't know anything about where it came from, you don't have to have that problem with us. NBC News, MSNBC, MTP, and the Meet the Press mindset right here for you on YouTube. Subscribe now.